My name is Catherine Erick, and I'm the Dean of CNAS, which is otherwise the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences here at UC Riverside. So before we get started with our program, we at UCR would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. So today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, staff, and our alumni. And we are all grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank each of you for joining us for Homecoming Week at UCR. I want to extend a very warm welcome to all the alumni in attendance, as well as our students, our staff, our faculty, our community members, prospective students, and your families. Thank you all for joining us again. And tonight, I'm very pleased to have a very special guest for this evening. So please join me in welcoming a Nobel Laureate and UC Riverside faculty member and distinguished member and a chemist and CNAS alumnus, Dr. Richard Schrock. So Richard, please join us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're really pleased. I actually, as I warned you, I'm going to say a few words about your background for this group, so they can all really truly appreciate your journey with us.
Thank you.
So, folks, after graduating from UCR in 1967, Dr. Schrock received his PhD in inorganic chemistry from Harvard. He spent 1 year as a National Science Foundation postdoctoral fellow at Cambridge University, and then 3 years at Central Research and Development at DuPont, which was actually E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company in Wilmington, Delaware. So in 1975, Dr. Schrock moved to MIT, where he quickly became a full professor in 1980 after only a few years. So he is now the FGK's professor emeritus at MIT, and I'd say more importantly, he's a George K. Helmkamp Founders Chair of Chemistry at UC Riverside. So Dr. Schrock's current research interests include the inorganic and organometallic chemistry of early transition metal complexes, especially alkylidene complexes and olefin metathesis reactions. So he has received numerous awards and medals, the most prominent of which is a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2005, for which he's also recognized with his own parking spot outside our chemistry building. So Dr. Schrock is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, and a foreign member of the Royal Society in London. So over the course of his very distinguished career, he has impacted many junior scientists. He supervised over 200 PhD students and postdoc and published over 600 scientific papers. So everybody, please join me again in welcoming Dr. Schrock to tonight's conversation. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And I see lots of people are applauding and all showing how proud they are. So thank you again for joining us. I do want to start with your story. So please tell us about your first journey to UCR as a student.
My first journey to UCR, I don't remember if I actually went up on my own or had a tour or what, but I do know that I accepted it. I went to UCR. So I guess one of the reasons for choosing UCR was that we didn't have much money. My parents were not wealthy, and I went to a California school, and that was one that was close to home, but not too close. But I knew it was a relatively new school. It wasn't as new as San Diego at that time. It was just a couple of years old, I think. But there were a number of features, one of them being the fact that I could probably get some experience in laboratory work, which I already was pretty experienced in as a kid at UCR. So that's when I came to UCR, and I was I guess first in a dormitory. I don't know if they still stand. I think they were there on the corner there by the used to be the World War II buildings that are now totally gone. Aberdeen, I guess it was called.
Aberdeen.
Yeah, is it still there? I think it's not operating, but as a dormitory. But I spent, I think, my first year in a dormitory, in that dormitory there, and then spent the summer because I was given the possibility of working over the summer for Jim Pitts, J.N. Pitts, a rather famous atmospheric scientist at the time. And that's what I wanted to do. And so everything was working out very well for me.
So I'm going to go back a little bit. You said you're talking a bit about your family. Tell me about your mom. Tell me about your family, your mom and dad. And I'd also, I've heard the story that you've told about your brothers. Just just your background, kind of maybe the expectations of going into college or not. And I think that's a really important story that folks are going to like to hear.
Right. So I was born in 1945 in January, and I had two brothers, one 5 years older named Ted and one 10 years older. So we three were about as different as you can imagine. My oldest brother was born in the middle of the Depression, my middle brother before World War II, and me after World War II. And the learning curve, if you like, in terms of our family was pretty steep because my parents were really bound to the land, so to speak. And in fact, they were removed. They weren't at the same age, but when each of them turned 16, of course, they were removed from school, from high school. They were legally bound to go to high school until 16, but on that day, they were removed from school because they were really needed on the farm. So my parents did not graduate from high school until I graduated from high school in 1963. And so well, let's start with my oldest brother, Luther. So Luther, there was no question that we would go on to college. I mean, college just wasn't an option. But Luther finally convinced my father that he should go to a trade school. So he ended up going to a machinist trade school. And then eventually, my father decided that, well, maybe it wasn't so bad to get some education. So he ended up being a chemical engineer. So he was the first one to really graduate from college, from Purdue, and ended up working for Dow as a chemical engineer. The middle brother, Ted, I guess followed his older brother, but he was fairly independent. And by this time, my parents decided that education was a good thing. And my middle brother was very interested in chemistry, interestingly, and he actually won an Indiana statewide contest for chemistry when he was in high school. And he became interested in becoming a medical doctor and ended up being a very famous surgeon, colorectal surgeon at UCSF. And I guess if there's anyone that I idolized more than others as in terms of people to follow, it would be him, because he was very smart. He seemed to have no trouble with anything, learning, speaking. He won a Golden Cane Award upon graduation from the medical class at UCSF. And he was really, the person I wanted to follow. But I wanted to stick with chemistry. Why do you end up doing something? Because you do it when you want to do it, when you want to relax or to learn or whatever. And I had started learning about chemistry when I was 8 years old. And Ted, my middle brother, gave me a chemistry set. I think because he was then 13 at the time, he was going into high school soon and was interested in chemistry, as I mentioned. So he thought maybe I would be interested in chemistry too. And I've always been interested in making things, figuring out how things work, doing experiments. And so chemistry sets back then were interesting, more interesting perhaps than they are today, in that they actually told you what you might make, some ester or whatever, and then told you how to make it and provided the materials to do it. And then a high school teacher of my brother's named Harry Daly, who was very interested in promoting chemistry among young people, gave me a bunch of texts that I followed and set up a laboratory in the back of our house in Decatur, Indiana. Took my chemicals with me when we, and my wife, my mother and I drove to San Diego in 1959 and kept studying chemistry, took chemistry in high school, but I was really pretty knowledgeable, so I didn't find it very difficult. And I wanted to learn more. And so I just always assumed that I would learn more in terms of going to college and learning more about chemistry. Now, back then, unlike today, where people asked to be admitted to maybe 15 colleges, universities, and travel to many of them, I applied to several different schools, among them Berkeley, for example, but I chose Riverside because of some of the factors I mentioned, being close to home and being relatively inexpensive and being small. There were only 4,000 students at the time. So fairly small chemistry department, more hands-on in terms of what I wanted to do, that is to do some chemistry of some sort. And I spent all my time then at Riverside in the summer and during the year. I probably didn't go to my German class often enough because I didn't do as well as I should have done because I was doing chemistry. Now, why did my parents get taken out of school? Our background is relatively strict in terms of religion. I didn't happen to follow that path, so I'm kind of the black sheep in my family. But at the time, the community in Bern, Indiana, where I was born, was very religious and very strict in terms of doing whatever the elder would ask you to do. And of course, as I said, they asked my parents to not go to high school after age 16. They were married young, fairly young. And I think my mother was 20 or so, and my father was 23. And Luther was born in 1935, as I mentioned, and right in the middle of the Depression. So it wasn't easy. They always had enough to eat because they lived on a farm and they could slaughter chickens and so on and grow their own vegetables. But other than that, we had no money. And it was difficult for them, very difficult for many years.
So thank you, Dick, for sharing this background. I can imagine there's aspects of your story that really resonate with a lot of our alumni and a lot of our students, just overcoming some difficulties and struggles in life. But really, you had a profound influence by your community and certainly your mom and dad, as well as your brothers. I'm curious when you talk about, kind of laughing about the chemistry sets. Chemistry sets, you said interesting. I'm thinking dangerous, explosive. So
it could be, almost anything can be dangerous if it's misused, but yes.
So how is your experience in the chemistry, through doing this in your garage or your home when you're at UCR? What was your experience doing chemistry at UCR? What was that like?
Well, I was put in charge. Jim Pitts, Professor Pitts, was studying atmospheric chemistry, and at that time, smog and what caused smog and the dangers of smog were a big deal, and there were many horror stories of the brown cloud rolling in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon over Riverside from Los Angeles. And he had a lot of money, and he actually employed 3 of us. We became friends, a guy named Jerry Brem and Jeff Wyatt and I got the highest scores, I believe, or at least that's the way I want to think about it, in an exam that was given by Professor Pitts in the fall of 1963. So that's why he hired us. And we kind of stuck together, took the same courses. And at the time, I was thinking maybe I would become like Professor Pitts, a photochemist and a physical photochemist. And so that's because he wanted me to study that, or gave me that as a project. I was put in charge of a Perkin-Elmer multi-path length infrared spectrometer. There's no fancy equipment at the time. It was just an analog device where you had to take a set of mirrors and a tank that was evacuated, in which there was a very low concentration of something you wanted to detect, such as a pollutant that would ultimately cause smog to form, and set the mirrors so that the beam would bounce back and forth 40 times. So 40 path lengths. So it made it, instead of about 1 meter long, it was about a 40 meter long path length. And I actually wrote a paper, or discovered my name on a paper, I should put it that way. 2, in fact, before I left UCR, on various aspects of atmospheric chemistry, and I'd call it organic or physical photochemistry at the time. But I loved it because I not only could tinker with this incredibly expensive machine, and I'd love to make things work, but I could build and did learn how to build vacuum lines and do glass blowing and connect them to this machine and do all sorts of manipulations on a gas line and a vacuum line, as it's called then. And I just loved it. I mean, I just love to keep my hands busy, and I still do keep busy that way. I still do a lot of woodworking, which my father was involved in. He was a carpenter, and something I do today. So I got my chance at UCR to really do something that I thought I wanted to do and could do, and learned a lot in doing it. And ultimately, the people who taught me there, James Pitts among others, really realized that I probably had some potential. And Jerry Bell was a physical chemist, newly arrived at UCR from Harvard as a doctorate, pushed me towards Harvard. He said, well, I think you could probably do well.
That was kind of my next question. So UCR, it seems like you kind of stumbled onto it. To go from UCR to Harvard, I mean, at the time, I mean, that's certainly, for your background, that was a big step. So
I think I was the first one, yeah, pretty sure.
So talk about, it sounds like you felt like you were very well prepared. You already had a lot of experience. You're working with professors, getting you into Harvard. How did you feel about making that transition?
From Riverside to Harvard?
Yeah.
Well, I went to Harvard as a physical chemist, or at least I thought I was a physical chemist. But as I look back on it, there was somebody named Fred Hawthorne, and Frederick Hawthorne passed away recently, a very famous guy at UCR who was an inorganic chemist. He'd also been in industry for a few years, but he and one other person named, now it slips my mind at the moment, were interested in boron chemistry. So they dualed boron chemistry is kind of developed during World War II. They thought it was going to be a jet fuel and things like that. But boron, like every element, has its pluses and minuses and unique features. And so it was a very interesting area of chemistry to develop. And so when he taught his inorganic chemistry course in my senior year, he concentrated on boron chemistry. Then when I went to Harvard, I looked around when I got there for somebody doing what I thought might be physical chemistry, but there wasn't really anything that attracted me at the time. And yet I knew I had to find somebody to work for. Unfortunately, there was a recent addition to the department. And in life, there are many of these things, these turning points where you say, oh, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have made the next step, and so on and so on. So there was somebody there who was a student of Jeff Wilkinson, who's a big name in inorganic chemistry, wrote many textbooks from Imperial College in London, and his name was John Osborne, and he got his degree with Wilkinson and came to Harvard and was a new faculty member there. And I was walking down the hall one day and noticed him in this long, ancient laboratory situation. And I knocked on the door and walked out in, and he told me about what he was doing and so on. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I can make all these compounds having transition metals in them. And he was the one who discovered and developed something called, unfortunately, it's called only Wilkinson's catalyst, but it should have been Wilkinson and Osborne, because he was the one who discovered it's a hydrogenation catalyst containing rhodium. And I thought that was really cool, because catalysts can repeatedly turn over, as we call it, and make B from A and over and over and over. And the higher number of times it turns over, the better, obviously, especially for rhodium, which is a very expensive metal. But at the time, transition metal chemistry was just taking off, and very little was known. This was really the first hydrogenation catalyst that you could say was something you could study. You could make compounds, you could measure kinetics, rates, and do crystal structures and so on. And I thought that was just very cool. Could be useful someday.
So listening to not just your discussion about Harvard or UCR and your background, I keep hearing that, hey, it was cool. So it seems some strong characteristics of yours. You're driven by curiosity. You're driven by, hey, that sounds cool. That sounds fun. Yet you're also not afraid to approach people. So at UCR, you approached these professors. You ended up working with them. At Harvard, you approached this professor. So those, I mean, this is for the audience, potential students. This is some really good lessons to learn. So you get some really positive outcomes by perhaps not being afraid. I don't get the sense that you're afraid at all. I just got the sense that you're like, hey, cool. Let's go have a conversation, and I want to learn more. So really great qualities. So perhaps going along that's really interesting. In your history, what again is often unique, usually when people go into academics, there's assumption that you stay in academics. You actually left Harvard and you went to DuPont for several years, and then went back to academics. So kind of what was the thought process behind that?
Well, I got my degree in 71, and I should say this is a very special date, November 16, because 52 years ago, I met my wife on November 16 in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Congratulations.
So we were married in 1971 in August 22nd. Anyway, when I finished my degree at Harvard, I hadn't thought ahead a lot, shall we say that. And not only that, it was a very bad time to look for a job because there were literally no jobs. I think there was one job in Edmonton, Alberta in academics, none in industry, and there were 600 applicants. I was fortunate to get one of the last, another fortunate occurrence, to get one of the last postdoctoral fellowships that NSF, National Science Foundation, would give to promising students to go abroad, for example. And I also felt like I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to see something new. I came from the West Coast to the East Coast, and why don't I just keep on going to England, for example? And I was awarded one of those fellowships, fortunately, because the next year they were more or less eliminated. There used to be quite a few available. I don't know the exact number, but let's say 25 or 30 in chemistry. Now there are a dozen over all fields. So if that, so again, I was lucky. My wife and I got married, we moved to Cambridge, England, and we became English. We just loved it. It was obviously a foreign country, but we didn't have to learn a new language, although I had studied Spanish, I had studied German. It was easier not to have to battle with that. But in retrospect, I kind of think I would have liked to learn more with my German, for example. That would be appropriate in Europe. But anyway, I ended up in Cambridge, England. From Cambridge, Massachusetts, I moved to Cambridge, England. And my wife got a job in an architectural firm called Twist and Whitley. And let me see if I can remember the number of pounds that she earned per month. I think it was something horrible, like 100 pounds per month. It was awful. Of course, that was a long time ago. And I enjoyed the chemistry. I joined the group of Jack Lewis, who eventually became Lord Lewis, Sir Jack and Lord Lewis in later years. And in November of 1967, when I arrived there, his compatriot in government affairs, he was very much involved, Jack, in government. And there's a guy named Nihol, who was a very famous chemist, very interested and involved in government activities. And he was killed in a car accident. So Jack Lewis had to take up all of his responsibilities. And I really didn't see Jack for more or less that entire year very much, because he was very, very busy filling in for Ron Nihol. But during my time there, there was a visitor from DuPont. And he said on sabbatical. The truth was that he was on his way more or less to go into academics, because he had his fill, I guess. He was a member of the top management team, but he always wanted to go into academics, like me. I couldn't find a job that first year of any kind, but his name was Earl Mutertes. And that year, I remember having dinner at his house, my wife and I, and he more or less made me an offer to come to DuPont at that time. Now, DuPont at that time had what's called a central research department, and many industries had one. And that was where you were hired and expected to make discoveries that would later on produce products that would make money for whatever the industry you were at, in this case, DuPont. And yet you were given freedom to do whatever you wanted for about 3 years before, you had to do something useful, I guess you would say. But it was a great place, because I'd read all these papers about all the research going on there. They had this nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer, 100 megahertz, very big machine. And it was an odd place. And they were doing all these fancy experiments and catalytic reactions, detecting intermediates and using NMR to follow the reactions. And I thought that was, again, really cool. So I decided to go to visit DuPont, and I visited some other places, but it was pretty clear that I would end up at DuPont, which I did. And so in 1972, we came back from England with 2 bicycles and a few suitcases and moved to Wilmington, Delaware.
Great.
And it was a wonderful place. It was everything I expected it to be. That's where I made the great discovery that propelled me back to academics, where in the end, I think I always wanted to be, but just couldn't get there at the time. And I accepted the best option, and certainly DuPont was a good option. And then after 3 years, I fortunately, again, got the opportunity to go to MIT.
So, I mean, I full disclosure group, as I'm a chemist too, so I've been following this work for a long time. So it's very clear to me how DuPont really set the stage in your academic career and your professional career. I'm looking at the time. We actually have a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to start probably pulling more of them, but I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you one. So what was it like to get the call? What was that like?
Well, as you might expect, it was either good news or bad news, and turned out to be
What do you
very
mean good news or bad news? How can it possibly be bad news?
Well, when you get a call at 5:30 in the morning, which I don't think I've gotten since that time, it's something special. And this was, of course, by that point, by 2005, I was aware of the fact that, you know, maybe somebody's got to win a Nobel Prize, and everybody tells me I'm going to win a Nobel Prize, but maybe not.
And I'm going to intercede. I'm going to intercede because people probably don't know what I'm talking about. When I mean the call from Sweden informing you that you're getting the Nobel Prize.
Okay, so I should have clarified that.
No, that was me. That was me being kind of goofy, but yeah.
Yeah, so the morning of the final decision, where everybody votes, everything's done by about 11 or so in the morning, and so with a 6-hour time difference, by 5 a.m. here, wherever they are in the world, these people who have just been winners of a Nobel Prize, they try to contact them. And there are all sorts of stories about not just phone calls, but inability to contact them, and people ending up on the other side of the globe. And I think Bob Grubbs, one of my friends who was a co-winner, was in New Zealand, where it was, I don't know, 11 p.m. the day after, or whatever it was. There was the phone rang at 5:30 in the morning, and I picked it up, and there was silence because for some reason that phone decided not to be working at that time. I don't recall why not, but fortunately my wife was upstairs and picked up the phone, and she called down to me. She said, "I think you should come up here." So there was one working upstairs. So I went upstairs and sat on the bed and listened to what they had to say, which was basically congratulations many times. And I think the last words I heard were, "Get ready for a very busy day."
And was it a busy day?
It was, because the next thing that happened is the phone started ringing again, because people would be calling in, because then it was official, and people would be calling in from, I think, South America. I got a call, Russia, and so on. So my wife said, "Do not answer the phone anymore." So I stopped answering the phone because I was still in my bathrobe.
Well, because it was 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, right. And people were knocking on the door.
Really? So did it sink in right away? I would think my head would be somewhere up in the clouds.
These things don't sink in right away. I mean, you know it's not a joke, but on the other hand, it's like watching a movie, only you're in it and you're watching your own movie. So it's the most unusual thing you can imagine, watching your own movie.
Well, I'm going to thank you again for sharing that. I'm going to look at some of the questions. And so your prize-winning research was on metathesis reactions. So what are your favorite research projects right now? Is it still metathesis, or is it something else?
Yeah, well, when I got the opportunity to move to UCR, I became emeritus at MIT on August 31st, 2018, and I accepted this generous offer to come to UCR the next day. So I decided then, since I couldn't maintain a large group, although UCR is funding the postdocs that I have, so I don't have to write grants, which is a big deal because now I felt I could think about everything that I haven't been able to think about in the last 40 years because I was too busy, really think about. And I knew that I wouldn't start anything else. I'm not going to go off and compete with 1 million people trying to cure cancer or anything. And I wasn't qualified to do that either. So I decided to solve some of the remaining problems, or try to, in what I knew best. And that was this reaction that, actually there are a couple of them. There are two types of metathesis reactions, one of carbon-carbon double bonds and one of carbon-carbon triple bonds. But I concentrated on the carbon-carbon double bond metathesis. And I decided that, there are a couple of very important questions that have not been answered since the beginning of this new area. So this is a catalytic reaction. So that takes me back to when I was at Harvard, and it can be useful in industry. It can be useful in academics. It can be useful in any situation. Biology, turns out, a recent paper that I co-sponsored with Laura Kiesling at MIT on some polymer chemistry involving this reaction, making certain kinds of polymers. It's useful in many different ways. And I've always felt, maybe since my time at Harvard, or maybe when I was at DuPont, that I would like whatever I do to be useful to somebody, sometime, in some way. And so that's what I was attracted to. I mean, not only doing things that nobody has ever done before, and that's why we say, oh, that's really cool, because if nobody's ever done that before, and I'm glad that I did it. And as far as I know, I'm the first person to do it. And we write papers and publish and so on, and my students get jobs. And so it was a big business. One of the questions is that I don't pretend to have answered yet, because there could be more than one answer. And that is these catalysts that are made with metals like molybdenum in the second row of transition metals in group 6, and tungsten right below it. These catalysts are made with the very olefins, carbon-carbon double bonded species, that become the reagents whose transformation is catalyzed. So somehow this carbon-carbon double bonded species, this olefin, makes a catalyst for its own future, so to speak. And the big question still is, to some degree, is how does that happen? The way I discovered how to make them does not happen in the absence of an alkylating agent. So you have to make the catalyst from the olefin, and then the catalyst works on the olefins and does this reaction. And we just published a paper about 2 months ago, maybe 1 month ago. And it's a long story, but we discovered how to turn an olefin, a carbon-carbon double bond, into a metal carbon double bond and make those catalysts. And that was one of the big achievements that I was after, to figure out how these things were made in real life situations. That may not be the only way they're made, this particular way that we made them. And in fact, I think there's another way, and that first way and the other way I think might be working are the two projects I'm focusing on now with my, I think on the average 3 postdoc group.
All right, so that's the next UCR discovery.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so actually, you alluded to this before, and I'm getting back to research projects. I know that you're a woodworker. And you said that your dad was a carpenter.
Right.
So do you want to say something about your woodworking, or do you have any projects that you can share with us right now?
Well, I just happen to have a little table here. Maybe I'm going to push it back and hold it up. See if you can see it. So this is
Sure.
a table. I
Beautiful.
sometimes want a table to put something on, coffee, typewriter, or whatever. And this is the top is made from bits and pieces of wood that I have lying around, all hardwoods. And so I call it a bits and pieces design. It's my signature design. Of course, each one is unique. And once I make it, I can't really do it again. So it's one of a kind.
It's one of a kind. That's gorgeous.
You've probably seen the one I have in my living room at Riverside. I think I've shown you that. But anyway, I make chairs. We bought what I call a mid-century modern house in Riverside, and I decided that I would change my style from the style I use here. Here's another piece, by the way. Over there.
Oh.
Is a sideboard. So
that's amazing.
The sort of thing that was my old style.
Oh, that's MIT style, and you're moving into Riverside style.
Yeah, so this is my old style. So this is a ebony, walnut, and cherry sideboard. And Nancy,
it's beautiful.
My wife, claims that that's her favorite work of mine that I made to be in our house. So I think that'll be with us for a while.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much for doing that. I love that stuff. So
wood is nice. Wood is nice.
Wood is nice. Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting. Okay, I'm making the analogy. I mean, just the wood. You're putting the pieces together that are very unique, and you're putting them together to make something beautiful, like you've been doing in the lab for years.
Just a different scale. From
different scale.
Very, very, very small to large.
We have some more questions here. We'll have a little bit more time. So from an undergraduate student, Eric, how much would you say that knowing the right people and connections influences a researcher's success?
It sounds like the person is asking, well, what about politics and science? And do you work to get to know the right people? And if you know the right people, then you're successful, and so on. And I've been kind of I wouldn't say I'm an anti-political type, but I basically not put that at the front of my list. Some people do. Somebody, especially today, I think they want to, of course, you want to work for somebody who's well known. That's not really politics. That's just learning the most you can from somebody who may know the most about the subject. And then if you do well, they can write a favorable letter for you. That's understandably how things work. But I would say a lot of relatively important people, if you want to say famous and so on, and that other people wanted to know, I never really put that as something I wanted to do. So I would say I'm not very good at it, first of all, in terms of making that the top of my list. And I think there are more important things to put at the top of your list.
Yeah, I think your career has proven that too. Thank you. Another question. What do you see as a single greatest mystery in chemistry that remains to be solved? That's a big one. Wow. That's a tough question, wow. But it's really interesting. Who else can you ask but a Nobel laureate in chemistry?
Yeah, right. I'm supposed to know everything, but
you are supposed to know everything that's related to chemistry.
I certainly don't know the answer to that question. Well, let me think about it for just 1 minute. The biggest mystery in chemistry. Now, some people would say that remains to be solved. some people might say, and I might agree with this, although there are many other mysteries out there. I mean, the origin of life is certainly a mystery in chemistry. And I don't think that's solved. And why are many of the compounds in us one-handed, right-handed instead of left-handed? DNA, for example, the right-handed helix.
Yep.
Why is that? Because we each have a right hand and a left hand, so there must be some left-handed helices out there, right? No. At least they don't do what the right-handed helices do. So how did all that get started? That is certainly a mystery that nobody's really solved yet. There must be a point where these two enantiomers, as they're called, right hand and left hand, get discriminated and life comes from one of them. That's a pretty cool thing. There's that word again, cool.
Cool, you use, well, it is cool. That was a really good answer.
And it's chemistry.
And it's chemistry.
Well, biology, but in the end, more and more today, biology is chemistry, as we know.
I have another question. This one's from Jesslyn. What's your advice to an undergraduate who is deciding if they should pursue a career in chemistry and research?
Are you trying to decide if you want to pursue, or?
I think they deciding if they should pursue a career.
Okay.
And I think it should pursue a career in research.
Yeah. Okay. Should. You know, chemistry really chose me. I didn't really choose chemistry, or it was a duet, and I guess I chose chemistry. If I chose chemistry because I enjoyed doing it, so that's number one. I mean, you've got to enjoy doing something. You can't say, "Oh, I want to be a lawyer because I'm going to make a lot of money." Well, I know a lot of lawyers who have stopped doing law because they get fed up with it and turn to something else. But so the first thing is, do you enjoy doing chemistry? Do you enjoy making things? Do you enjoy trying to solve puzzles? I mean, a lot of things are puzzles, and there are a lot of disappointments, so you have to be prepared for that. If you're going into academics, for example, or even into industry, I mean, while you might make a decent living, you're not going to make lots of money, but money is not really what you should be thinking about. At least that's not what I thought about. When I came to MIT from DuPont, I was making $19,000 a year, I think. And my 9-month salary at MIT was $16,000. Yeah, that's right.
You earn less. You move to academics to earn less money.
Opportunities, right? I mean, if you enjoy doing research, you enjoy puzzles, you enjoy solving puzzles, you enjoy, telling somebody that you've made something that nobody else has ever made, and this is how you made it, and it's really cool. There's that word again. It's what are you going to do with chemistry? Well, you can do so much with chemistry. If you're interested in science, you can do so much with chemistry. I mean, everything from environmental chemistry to astrochemistry to forensics and art, in addition to basic research of the type that I have been most accustomed to, and which is pretty rare these days because more and more people who give you money want you to do what they tell you to do, or you won't get your grant renewed. So, and then you have to decide if that's something you want to do, and what area you're going to go into. And as you do research, maybe you'll make a mistake occasionally, and that's what undergraduate research opportunities are all about. You try it out and see if you like that kind of chemistry, whatever it might be, when you're an undergraduate. That's what I did. And I liked it,
Great
but
advice.
ultimately I chose something else when I went to graduate school. And that's very typical. And you can move from chemistry to other fields. I have many people who've gone into law, for example, intellectual property law, scientific intellectual property law, because they have a PhD in chemistry. So that was useful for them. And maybe that was good for them, because maybe they wouldn't have been very good at being a sort of experimental chemist like I am, doing basic research. So should you go into chemistry? I think you have to think about whether you really like puzzles and challenges and really new frontiers and being there. Frankly, I have to say it before somebody else is, because it is competitive. I mean, everything's competitive, and research is competitive. I mean, you want to discover something. That's what I wanted to do. Turns out I did, and I was really lucky.
You did on a big, yes.
One experiment in 1974 DuPont.
And I'm also, I listened to the word cool. You use the word lucky a lot. And I don't believe it's luck. I believe it's hard work. I believe it's your curiosity, your interest, your joy, and really wanting to discover things, So this is my own take on this.
Yeah. Well, that's right. That's yeah. I mean, luck favors the prepared mind and all
exactly.
that. And that's true. And you don't just accidentally discover a compound like I discovered at DuPont.
Yes.
You had some ideas and you were working against discovering something.
Yes.
And there it was. And discoveries are very difficult to predict, otherwise it wouldn't be discoveries. So yeah, people just say, "Oh, what's the next big discovery?" And the answer is, I don't really know, because it wouldn't be a discovery if I knew.
That's right. So we have just a few minutes left, and I'm going to take one more question. And this one looks like it's really lighthearted. Would you root for the Dodgers or the Red Sox if they met at the World Series?
I'd have to root for the Red Sox, but I'm not a diehard Red Sox fan or baseball fan. Until they get to the World Series, then I pay attention. I'm really,
Fair enough.
I pay attention when they're at the top.
Hey, that's fair enough. Well, in the last few minutes, do you have any final closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with us tonight?
Well, I could say yes. Something very important to me is actually being at UCR now. Because when I retired in 2018 from MIT, I did it because I thought that I was, well, like anybody who works hard in a subject, you get a little burned out eventually. And I wanted some sort of renewal, something different. And since Riverside gave me so much, I had the opportunity, thanks to you and Cindy LaRive and the Chancellor and others, to go back to UCR and give back to students there, graduate students and other students that, well, I can only work with postdocs, but graduate students, if I can talk to them, lecture them and coach them about chemistry and how important it is. And I think since I believe I'm the only Nobel Laureate in chemistry at UCR, so it's a very special thing for me, and I hope it's a special thing for UCR too. And I'm very grateful for that. And as I told you, we're still making discoveries in spite of the fact that I have a small group, and it's really a great joy to be there. Even though it's only part-time, to be there in the winter is the winter months, the winter quarter is really a wonderful time. And my wife and I enjoy having our house there, and we renovated it, and It's not too far from campus, up in Canyon Crest, so it's very convenient, and we're looking forward again to coming out this next year on January 4th, my birthday.
Your birthday.
Next year.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing this story. I also just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who is listening in with us tonight. Thank you to the alumni, our students, our faculty, and our staff. Thanks to all our community members. That includes prospective students. UCR is a great place, and you can possibly do research with amazing scientists and amazing faculty. And thank you, Dr. Schrock, for your insights and continued support for UCR and CNAS and everything that you do. It's been really wonderful. I'd like to also ask everybody else to join us. This is one homecoming event. We're having another homecoming event on Saturday where we're going to be working with our science ambassadors. So this is going to be on Saturday at 2 o'clock, where we're focusing on our science ambassadors, both past and present, who's going to be sharing their experiences, doing research and various activities at UCR. So with that, thank you again, Dick, for a very inspiring and aspiring discussion tonight. And again, thank you everybody for your time. And we'll see you soon.